Hi, everybody. I'm Larry Harnisch. Since 1996, I have been studying the Black Dahlia case. And what I'm going to do today is go through a recent video by Steve Hodel and react to his comments, his claims, and kind of fill you in along the way. The setup is that he was invited to talk to a book club in Atlanta called Sisters in Crime. And it was a very non-threatening session, a generally attentive audience, a few not terribly threatening questions, and pretty much they went along with the usual Steve Hodel claims. And so we're going to get into that. The one thing, there's several things I want to talk about before we get going. First of all, pay very close attention to Steve Hodel. If you find his presentation convincing, believable, and all that stuff, then you've been had, okay? Because Steve Hodel gives a master class. He's really good. He's a very good liar. He gives a great master class in how police officers lie. Follow him closely, pay close attention. He's always confident. He's always assured. He never gets rattled. He never offers too much information, just enough. When an inconvenient fact starts heading his way, he'll deflect it on the basis of, well, let me clarify that a little bit, or that kind of thing. If none of those techniques work, if he can't talk his way around it, then the last tool in his toolbox is to attack the individual. And he'll do that with me. He'll say, oh, the Larry Harnisch and Company, you know, it's the sour grapes. He says the same old thing. And you will hear him do that occasionally. But generally, nobody pushes him hard enough to really corner him on any hard questions. So he doesn't do that real often, except with me. Now, the other thing I want to point out, and it's really important, is that there is almost nothing about Elizabeth Short in this presentation. She almost doesn't exist. The most he says about her is that she's a young woman, beautiful, dark hair, brunette. That's it. Beyond that, it's all about Steve. And she is just the fuel that kind of gets the story going. And then he's off and running. But there's almost nothing about Elizabeth Short in there at all. It's all about Steve and Steve's journey. Okay, so without, let's go ahead, and this is going to be crude. I apologize for that. But I hope the content makes up for the crude technology of how I'm doing this. Okay, let's share the screen here. Okay, let me pause this for a second.
Like 50 years by the time I started looking into it.
And here we go. This is the lady who's introducing Steve, in case you're wondering.
Okay, well, you did a great job there, Don. I don't really need to say much more. That's about it. Basically, as you said, LA, born and raised in LA, went 4 years into the Navy.
Okay, what Steve Hodel is doing here is establishing his career. He's establishing his credibility. He's going to tell you that he was in the Navy. He's going to tell you that he joined the LAPD. He will tell you that he eventually became a homicide detective in Hollywood. He will tell you all of that. What he will not tell you is that he never joined Robbery Homicide Division downtown. He was always out in Hollywood.
19 to 21, came out and did what a lot of young men my age did then, was join the LAPD and the new breed, as they said back. And we're talking about I joined LAPD in '63 and retired in 1986. So 23 and a half, almost 24 years on the department. Worked uniform patrol for 6 years, then went into detectives and worked all the different tables. Robbery, burglary, sex crimes, juvenile, all of that. And gravitated, I guess, to homicide. 300 murders in my career I investigated, and we did have a high solve rate in Hollywood, but it wasn't just me. It was a lot of couple of other dedicated.
Okay, now some people will ask me, well, what kind of detective was Steve Hodel really? He says he has this high Solbright and all that kind of stuff. The only thing I will hear from his peers, the other detectives who were in the LAPD who worked homicide when Steve Hodel was working homicide, was Steve was an okay detective with a drinking problem. And that's pretty much all they'll say. No great shakes, not great, not terrible, never went downtown to work RHD. So that's kind of who you're dealing with.
Detectives working with me. And I retired, as you say, in '86 and moved up to Bellingham, Washington. I had two small boys at the time and wanted to get out of the big city and the crime. So we went up to Bellingham, Washington, and I opened up a PI, investigative criminal defense. So 24 years of
It's all very standard stuff.
prosecution. Then I started doing criminal defense work. A lot of cases.
You know, interestingly enough, notice this picture in the background. Notice who Steve is. That's a picture of Steve and a certain police chief. I think that's Thad Brown, who Steve accuses of being of covering up his dad's crimes. But it is interesting that that picture is there.
Court appointed, that sort of thing. And so I'm 13 years into retirement, and I get this 2 a.m. phone call. It's my
Okay, here it comes. Dad is dead. Here comes the setup. Are you ready for Steve's journey? Because here we go.
Stepmother. You know, she's hysterical. She's in San Francisco. She says, "Your father, the paramedics are here. Your father has just been pronounced dead. Come down." So I flew down to San Francisco.
Okay, now when Steve talks about his dad, George Hodel, he'll say, oh, he lived in the penthouse and he had a perfect view of the cemetery where Elizabeth Short is buried and all this other stuff. None of that's true. I'm not sure if he gets in, I forget if he gets into it into this presentation, but he usually will say something like that.
Hours later, did all the things you have to do in the passing of a parent. And the second or third day, I'm with June there, and she walks out and she hands me a small album.
Aha. Now, this is important. Pay very close attention, because what Steve is going to say is that his stepmother gives him this album and he sees these two pictures of women, and he decides that, well, after some thought and deliberation and sort of a lightning bolt strikes, oh, well, this has to have been the Black Dahlia. Now, the reality is that these were two pictures of different women, neither of whom were Elizabeth Short, okay? One woman recognized herself on a TV presentation, contacted Steve and said, hey, that's not Elizabeth Short, that's me. I remember your dad. I was there. He took my picture. My husband was there as a chaperone. Now, the other woman was unidentified so far. But what is important, and it's really important, is that neither of these pictures are Elizabeth Short. And more important than that, her family says that's not her, okay? Remember that. The family says that's not Elizabeth Short. Pay close attention to how much Steve bases his presentation on these photographs. Here we go.
She says, I think your father would want you to have this. That's a 3x5-inch album. Family photos, mother, brothers, sisters, that sort of thing. And there's this beautiful dark-haired young woman.
Ah, did you see what he did? He left out the other picture. Now, when you go back to 2003 with the Black Dahlia Avenger book, he's got two pictures in there. He's totally eliminated that claim. It's gone.
Reclining, semi-nude, or nude, actually.
Okay, now you can only see her up to her shoulders. You don't know if she's wearing anything or not. You know, she could be in a bathing suit. It's just sort of titillating to say, oh, well, she's nude or semi-nude. You don't know that. But that's, you have to watch Steve every minute.
From the waist up.
No, it's not from the waist up. It's her shoulders. That's all you can see. let me cut away to the photograph. Now, here's the picture that Steve Hodel is talking about. Does she look nude or semi-nude to you? You're supposed to have that impression perhaps, but you really can't see anything. There's a little bit more than her shoulders, but not much. She could be wearing a bathing suit, you just don't know, or she could be draped with fabric. It's just titillation.
Who is this? Because I don't know, somebody your father knew from a long time ago. And to this day, I can't explain why, but Black Dahlia comes to mind.
I can explain why.
It's clearly a picture from the 40s and young, dark hair. And it could have been because there was a movie came out, Who is the Black Dahlia?
Okay, here it comes.
Which was a TV movie in '75, and I had seen that. And I'm thinking maybe my connection was because she looked so similar to that.
Okay, now this is really, really important. You see how Steve just slides into this stuff. Who is the Black Dahlia was made in 1975, but it was a TV movie. It didn't have a single image of Elizabeth Short. It starred Lucy Arnaz, who was made up to look like kind of Elizabeth Short. And so what Steve Hodel is claiming that he remembered was not Elizabeth Short at all. It was Lucy Arnaz portraying Elizabeth Short. This is how he operates, okay? But there's going to be a lot more about these photographs. Pay attention.
I don't know, but it kind of came and went. I didn't pay much attention to it. So I'm on the phone to one of the things you need to know about this is that my father's background is remarkable.
Okay, here we go. The sexual hijinks of George Hodel, his many wives and his many kids.
I'm going to take maybe 5 or 10 minutes to talk about his bio because you have to understand.
Oh yeah, he was also a child genius. I forgot that part.
His background to understand what's coming. Anyway, I'm on the telephone to my half-sister Tamar.
Ah, Tamar enters.
Same father, different mothers. And we're talking about the great man and his remarkable life.
Wait a minute, wait a minute. Steve Hodel and Tamar are reminiscing about the great man? Really? This is the guy who molested her and suddenly they're reminiscing about him? How does that make any sense? I don't get it. I don't get it. I really don't get it.
And she says, out of nowhere, she says, well, you know, he was a suspect in the Black Dahlia murder.
Uh-huh. Do go on, Steve.
I said, what the hell are you talking about, Tamar? Where is this coming from? Well, Tamar and I had had maybe a half-hour conversation in the previous 45, 50.
That's probably true. The various siblings or half-siblings were not close. That is probably true.
Years. I became a cop and she kind of spun out and sex, drugs, rock and roll and did her own thing, etc.
To say the least, Tamar Hodel was a free spirit.
Just going away. Anyway, I said, well, there's no way. I said, this is ridiculous. My background, I could show you had nothing to do with it in 10 minutes.
Yeah. Okay. Here comes the setup. He's going to try to clear his dad. Here we go.
So, and I didn't really know much about the Black Dahlia murder.
Except for the TV movie.
I knew it was a famous unsolved. When I went through the academy, I had seen photographs, the crime scene, and it was a famous whodunit.
Oh, so you did know something about it then?
So, but really, I had no connection with it, and that was kind of my only exposure other than seeing this 1975 film. I didn't even know her name, Elizabeth Short. So,
oh, he mentioned her name. Thank you.
Anyway, basically, that started me, and I was going to set up and show my father had nothing to do with it.
Oh, sure.
Exonerate him. So this is ridiculous.
That had already been done, Steve. That was done back in the 40s. But do go on, or I should say the late 40s, early 50s. But do go on, please, about your quest to exonerate your dad. We'd love to hear about it.
I made the mistake of following the evidence.
Yeah, the evidence that you made up, Steve.
And So listen, if it's okay, I'll do a bio on my father.
Oh, please.
Remarkable individual, and I was very close to him. And so, born in Los Angeles in 1907, raised in South Pasadena area, just outside of Los Angeles. A child prodigy.
Okay, this is really stretching the truth a long way. I think this is where we're going to get into George Hodel doing piano recitals at Shrine Auditorium. The reality, which is where we live, is that George Hodel played a piano interlude during a day of speeches at Shrine Auditorium, which was a huge barn that held thousands of people. The idea of giving a piano recital in this enormous place is a joke, to say the least. But in the world of Steve Hodel, Dad was a child prodigy. Here we go.
His own piano concerts at the Shrine Auditorium at the
No.
age of 9.
No.
His teacher said he's highly gifted. He's going to become a great concert pianist.
No. He played a piece of piano music as an interlude during a long series of speeches as sort of to break up the monotony. That's what happened.
He's attending high school in South Pasadena. Not only is he a gifted musician, but he's also intellectually gifted. 186 IQ.
Okay, there we have it, 186 IQ. Where do we get that number, Steve? IQ tests didn't exist when George Hodel was a kid. They hadn't been invented yet. And did you know that anybody with that high a score got written up in the newspaper, which never happened to George Hodel? This is total BS. It is just totally pulled out of his nose. Nobody ever challenges on it. Another lie.
Point above Einstein.
Okay, Einstein's IQ is also immaterial since Einstein was an adult when the IQ test was introduced. It's a joke.
So high genius. Incidentally, that skips a generation. But my sons are in good shape. And he goes to Caltech, this Caltech Institute University at
California Institute of Technology, Steve. That's what it's called.
14, and was there for a year. Not only is he intellectually gifted and musically gifted, he's also sexually precocious. He has an affair with a professor's wife who gets pregnant, breaks up her marriage. She goes back east and has the child, a girl. Dad at 16 now, or whatever he is.
So that's another Hodel kid. Interesting.
Follows her back, says, "I love you, I want to marry you." And she says, "George, you're a child yourself. Get out of my life. This was a terrible mistake." She names the child Folly. And so he comes back to LA. He's obviously asked to leave Caltech after a year. He gets a job. He passes himself off. He's 17 now, and he passes himself off as 21. He gets a job with the LA Record.
Okay, this is also not true. The LA Record, which Steve Hodel is going to build into this huge institution as a major paper, it was dying. It was so bad that it would hire a kid, an inexperienced kid like George Hodel. That's the reality. The LA Record was a little nothing paper. Aggie Underwood worked there as, I think, got her start there because, again, they would hire anybody. So no, the LA Record was not a big paper. It was a nothing. And I forget when it folded, but it didn't last long.
One of the major newspapers in Los Angeles.
No.
Crime reporter.
Okay. We don't know what George Hodel was writing because newspaper stories in those days didn't have bylines, Steve. So unless you've got a book of his clippings where he said, "I wrote this," you don't know what the hell he did.
He starts writing around initially with Vice, which this is during Prohibition. So he's riding around with the Vice guys. They're kicking doors. They're arresting the judge with a young blonde in the speakeasy.
Names, please. Let's have their names. If you have the stories, we should have their names. Thank you. Otherwise, I call baloney.
and stuff. And then he graduates, he starts riding around with LAPD's homicide guys. And same thing, he's going to the murder scenes and he's writing these tabloid stories. The bloody ace of spades next to the body. That's
Again, let me point out that stories in those days didn't have bylines. We don't know who wrote them. So unless you've got his clippings and he says, I wrote it, we don't know what the hell he was doing, if he was even doing it.
sort of thing. He does that for a while, and then he decides, at that time he's double dating. He's still a teenager, and he's double dating with a young man by the name of John Huston. Well, John Huston at that time was the
Time out for a fact check. Okay.
wasn't the famous director. He would
Okay,
become.
I'm going to take a pass on all this double dating stuff. Okay, I'm going to take a pass on all this double dating stuff. There's only so much you can do with, and it's not really irrelevant to what comes later on.
And stage and screen. And they were double dating. John was dating a woman by the name of Emilia. And yeah,
Pretty sure that's Amelia.
he enters medical school at Berkeley, 4 years, goes across the bay, UCSF, San Francisco, graduates with his medical degree in 1936, and basically has another affair with another woman.
Two things. First of all, George Hodel graduated from medical school with the minimum surgical training. Steve Hodel will tell you, oh, well, my dad had so many hours. Yeah, everybody who graduated from medical school had exactly the same training. He didn't have anything beyond that, okay? Number one. Number two, Steve Hodel will tell you that, they taught this procedure in medical school, hemi-demi corporate, which is where you cut somebody in half, as Elizabeth Short was done. Reality check, no, they didn't teach it. That procedure didn't exist in the 1930s when George Hodel graduated from medical school. Total lie. Okay, thank you.
Duncan is born, Emily's child is Duncan.
Oh, there's Duncan. Duncan Hodel, Duncan Hodel, who quit talking to Steve after he published Black Dahlia Avenger. Do go on.
And he's born in 28, has an affair with another woman. She gets pregnant, and he has a child 35 by her name's Tamar. That was the half sister I would later earlier.
Let me point out that Tamar's birth certificate does not list a father. Presumably it was George, but the birth certificate does not list a dad, for what that's worth.
Anyway, he then decides he needs some space. He leaves the women and the children. He goes off to doctor and becomes a sole surgeon at a logging camp in New Mexico and Arizona.
Okay, now let me point out that logging camps generally are not known for their elaborate hospital facilities. You really don't do a lot of surgery in a logging camp. You're going to take care of first aid, broken bones, splinters, cuts, wounds, stuff like that. Anything serious is going to go to a nearby town for treatment, more competent, more extensive treatment. So to say that there was a surgical suite or anything like that at this logging camp is like, no way. Okay, let's press on.
And he works on the Indian reservations. By this time, Dorothy, who married John 7 years later now, but their marriage falls apart. She's back in LA. He goes to LA, hooks back up with Dorothy, Houston's ex-wife, and my older brother Michael is born in 39.
Okay, now let me point out, because Steve makes a great big deal about how the fact that George and Amelia were never married, Duncan's parents weren't married, and Duncan was ergo illegitimate. Not true. The 1930 census shows that they were married. It says how long they'd been married. That is just Steve Hodel, I assume, little peevishness getting back at Duncan for not talking to him. more about Duncan in the future. There's a lot of dirty laundry in the Hodel family. Let me put it that way.
I come along in 41, and my younger brother Kelly comes along in 42. So Dad joins the LA County Health Department, quickly rises to the top, becomes the VD czar of the health department in Los Angeles. He buys this rather unique home.
Oh, let's talk about the Souden house. Actually, Steve, your grandfather owned that house and rented it to your dad. And as a matter of fact, by the time your dad was living there, it was this weird white elephant in the neighborhood that nobody wanted. It had been a rental for a long time. It had a theater company in there. It was just sort of a hodgepodge, whatever. What people see now at the Souden house is after $1 million+ remodeling. It was this weird old white elephant. Do go on.
Some of your listeners may be familiar with the Soden house. It was built by Frank Lloyd Wright Jr.
No, it was not built by Frank Lloyd Wright Jr. It was built by Frank Lloyd Wright's son, Lloyd Wright. Okay? Details matter, Steve. You're a cop. You're supposed to know this stuff.
Let's see, can we see this? I don't know. It's kind of hard to see, I suppose. Anyway, a very unique architecture in Los Angeles and Hollywood. And you see it in probably a number of different films it's been used for. And we all moved into the Soden house, which we call the Franklin house. It was on Franklin Avenue. And so we're the three little princes running around.
Oh, do talk about the three little princes running around the Soden house. I really want to hear about that, because here is where we are getting into a lot of things that aren't true.
George is the king, Mother's the queen, and it's fantasy time, it's magic time for
fantasy time.
us little boys. Everything's going on swimmingly, and then in 1949, there's a knock at the door, and it's LAPD.
Oh, this is so funny. Okay, let's backtrack a little bit here. Steve's parents were estranged. Okay, for most of the 1940s, Steve's mom, Dorothy, and the three kids knocked around LA. She went to jail after numerous arrests for neglecting Steve and his brothers. We have their addresses. They were not ever living at the Souden house. I mean, I think every once in a while, out of desperation, she had nowhere else to live, she would crash there. I think she used it as a mail drop. But you also have to remember that for a bunch of 1946, George Hodel wasn't even in LA. He was in China. Let's have a fact check. Let's go to the fact check and see just exactly when George Hodel went to China. The records show that George Hodel was in China by April 1946, and he got back to California in September 46. So that's what, 5 months, something like that. So that period is not when the family was all living together in the Souden house. That's just fantasy land. Okay, none of that happened. I should point out that in 1940 and 41, George and Dorothy Hodel were living in San Marino. They were not living in the Souden house. And more interestingly, George and Dorothy got married after Steve's older brother was born. Oh, oops, left that out. Now, let me point out in 44 and 45, Dorothy Hodel was getting busted for child neglect and eventually went to jail for, I think, 90 days. Meanwhile, George is he's got a clinic in Little Tokyo. Of course, during World War II, all the people of Japanese ancestry were sent to internment camps. And so you had this vacant neighborhood. In the meantime, you have the great migration from the south of all the blacks. Well, Los Angeles is a segregated city. And black people have a hard time finding a place to live. So the thinking was, hey, we've got Little Tokyo, which is vacant. we'll let the black people live there and we'll call it Bronzeville. And so George Hodel opens a clinic treating poor blacks in Little Tokyo, renamed Bronzeville. And so it was never the elite of LA, it was poor, needy blacks. Let's go on. And away we go.
Dr. Hodel, yes, you're under arrest.
Oh. Wow, this is amazing. Steve has just glossed over the 1940s. He makes it sound like he was living at the Soudan House right up until the time that George was busted for allegedly molesting Tamar. Okay, so that means that Steve was living in the Soudan House, not with his mom, where she was being, he's glossed over all the stuff about him being neglected, all the places that they lived with his mom. In 1946, when George was in China for most of the year, 47 when Elizabeth Short was killed, he makes it sound as if he was at the house when George was arrested. And of course, Tamar would have also been living there. I mean, it's like none of this happened. This whole portrayal is just wrong, way wrong. But do go on, Steve.
For incest. So Dad is arrested for incest with my half sister Tamar, the one, she was 14 at the time, down there visiting us for the summer.
Oh, let's do a fact check on that. Let's see when Tamar was. Let's do a fact check and see when Tamar was in Los Angeles. Stand by for a fact check. Okay, Tamar arrived in June 1949. As it happened, Father's Day. It was not down for the summer. Tamar was an incorrigible teenager. Her mother was at her wit's end with Tamar and had put her into a girls' school because Tamar was just misbehaving and had been accused of lying and seen by a psychiatrist about the age of 7 or 8. And so Tamar had a long history of lying. And so the mom suffered a heart attack, said, I can't take it anymore. She shipped Tamar down to Los Angeles to live with George. Well, George doesn't want Tamar. Tamar doesn't want to live in LA with George. And so Tamar said to Duncan, the half brother that Steve never talks about, Tamar tells Duncan, I'm going to make up a story about Dad that he molested me. It won't be true, but the cops won't know that and I'll get him in trouble. And that's what really happened. And that's what came out in court testimony. Okay. So let's get Steve's version of it here. Are we recording? Yes. Okay. All right. Let's get Steve's version of it.
She alleges she runs away. They pick her up and she discloses. They said, why did you run away? Because my life's so terrible.
Yeah. The molestation happened in June. She ran away in October. Let me just point that out helpfully.
She discloses having sex with our father and some other.
Some others, you mean 13 boys at Hollywood High School by others? Yeah. All of whom were interrogated, all of whom were questioned by police, and all of whom were not charged. But do go on.
Individuals, 2 women and another man in the bedroom. Big headlines, head of LA County Health Department arrested.
Yeah, they didn't really get into that. It was a sort of sensational case, but the stories ran inside most days.
Because Jerry Geisler, who was a famous.
Okay, Jerry Geisler. Come on, Steve, you're a cop. You're supposed to know this stuff.
Defense attorney of the day and kind of a Johnny Cochran of his day. And he defends him. There's a 3-week trial.
Okay, no, Jerry Geisler did not defend your dad. It was another attorney in his office. But I should point out, because it's important, that your dad, George Hodel, was found not guilty by a jury that included 8 or possibly 9 women. There were also 10 people who testified that they wouldn't believe Tamar under oath, including her mother and Tamar's grandmother. Okay. And I should point out that the district attorney had just won another famous incest case where they won a conviction. And in fact, Tamar took a lot of her used that sort of as a template for her allegations against your dad. But let's go on.
They basically paint Tamar with a pathological liar brush, not to be believed.
Yeah, you know what, Steve? Everybody in your family says Tamar is a liar except for you. Her mom said so, her grandmother said so, and her kids say Tamar's a liar and manipulator. But do go on about how accurate and believable she is, please.
Anyway, the jury comes back not guilty. Dad leaves, shortly after that, Dad leaves the country.
Okay, let's go for a fact check and see when George leaves the country. Hang on. Okay, so George Hodel is found not guilty in 1949. He goes to Hawaii in 1951. In between then, he is under surveillance by the police department. They bug the house. I assume that's coming next. Let's go.
We're now into 1950. Goes to Hawaii for a couple of years, marries a wealthy Filipina, has 4 more children, basically goes to Manila in Asia for 40 years, comes back to Los Angeles, divorces her, marries another woman by the name of June, comes back to San Francisco in 1990. And that's when I put back up with him. And for the last decade of his life, we become very close. So he's done up.
You know, Steve, you have a real interesting way of showing how close you were to your dad. Just saying.
11 children by 5 different women, has had this incredible life. And I, go figure, I was his favorite, go figure. And we become very close. And so I'm off to show that he had nothing to do. This is ridiculous. He had nothing to do with this crime.
Oh, yes. Here we go again. Back to dad is not guilty.
Yeah, I believe I know the sexual thing happened, but murder, no way, especially. So I basically realized I can't do an absentee investigation. I moved back to LA in 90, he died in 99. I moved back in 2000 and spent the next 20 years investigating. Basically, my first book came out, Black Dahlia Avenger came out in 2003.
Oh, let's talk about Black Dahlia Avenger, Steve. Let's talk about how you wrote it in total secrecy. Let's talk about how you didn't tell anybody what you were working on. Let's talk about how you did not ask the LAPD to see your dad's files in robbery homicide before you wrote your book or while you were writing your book. Let's talk about that.
And the rest of the 8 to 9 books are basically an ongoing investigation.
You could call it an investigation. I call it a franchise of garbage.
Not only was I much surprised that he actually committed that crime and put it all together, I submitted it in secret to a head deputy district attorney in LA.
Oh, let's talk about Stephen K. Let's bring up Stephen K. Stephen K was in the district attorney's office. Steve did approach him. That part of it is true. What Steve will not tell you is that Stephen K no longer talks about, let's point out that Stephen K no longer will discuss the Black Dahlia case. He will no longer discuss Steve Hodel. And he absolutely says, nope, Steve Hodel is wrong. There was no LAPD cover-up. You go on.
And much to my surprise, he was a serial killer.
No.
It wasn't just the one crime. There was about a dozen lone woman murders in that time period in Los Angeles. See this.
All different matters of killing. None of them are related. It's baloney.
You see this? Anyway, there's this shows 9 women in a very tight geographical area in the Hollywood and Los Angeles area. And
okay, let me point out, he's got Gene Spangler in there. We don't know if Gene Spangler was killed. We just don't know. She disappeared. It would seem logical. It would seem likely that she was killed, but we just don't know. Okay, fact check. George Hodel was arrested October 5th, and Gene Spangler disappeared October 7th. George was in jail until he was arraigned, and bail had to be set. Steve will tell you that, oh yeah, my dad bailed out immediately. Well, we don't know that. Maybe it took a while for him to bail out. We do know that he had to put a lien against the house in order to pay his attorney. So it's not really clear how he got out of jail. Okay.
you're probably right about the 9, he says, but I would file on 2 cases. I would file on Elizabeth Short, the Black Dahlia, and I would file on Jean French, which was another murder where the body was posed on a vacant lot.
No, she wasn't posed. Jean French was trying to get away from her killer. The guy was beating her up. She opened up a car door and fell out of it, and the guy beat her to death. He was using the handle of a socket wrench and then stomped her to death. And trivia note, he left heel prints all over the place, showing that he had very small feet, unlike your dad who had large feet. So no, not posed, no relationship. Do go on.
About 5 miles west. He says those I would take to court and I would win.
Oh, I would love to be a defense attorney on those cases. Oh boy.
In a jury trial based on your investigation and evidence.
Notice that. Notice that. That's very important. Based on your evidence. Your evidence is crap. He doesn't know that. He foolishly trusts you and your crappy evidence.
The others are probably right, but not enough. I have a high following. So with that, I wrote the book that came out, Black Dahlia Avenger, in 2003. And I kept ongoing investigations.
Yes, and Duncan Hodell never talked to you again because it's all lies. Please, Steve, go on.
On the other crimes, and have just basically finished the early years. In other words, I really
So boring.
realized he didn't wake up at age 40 and say, I think I'll be a serial killer.
No, he never woke up and said, I think I'll be a serial killer. He wasn't a serial killer.
So I've just published in November, I came out with the 2 early years books, which cover the 20s and 30s and his crimes in and around Los Angeles and throughout California. So basically, and that resulted in a lot of documentaries and interviews. And
People are absolute suckers for retired homicide detective discovers dead dad is serial killer. They love that narrative. They can't get enough of it.
Half the world said, oh, this is a daddy dearest. The other half said, no, this is a slam dunk.
No, it's a daddy dearest.
And the evidence has kept building.
No, it didn't. You kept piling up nonsense on top of nonsense, Steve. That's what happened.
And it just increases and increases to where we're way beyond reasonable doubt
Ha
on the Black Dahlia and many of the other crimes. And so that's kind of a quick and dirty overview of where we are.
You got that right.
And one of the problems was, so I had established I had made my bones on the Dahlia case, and pretty much 90% of readers got it.
Maybe. The Dahlia was what people did swallow the Dahlia thing. Where you got into trouble, Steve, was when you dragged in Zodiac. People found that a really difficult thing to accept.
And I said, yeah, this is definitely solved. And
yeah, well, okay, ex-homicide cop trading on his LAPD career, people are going to believe it.
The kicker was basically an LA columnist, Steve Lopez, who was a well-known columnist for the LA Times.
You bring in Steve Lopez because Steve Lopez asked me to look at your book and I told him it was nonsense. Do go on.
Did a couple of quick articles on my initial investigation. And he went to...
Okay, what really happened was this. Steve Lopez was doing a reading on a book, and Steve Hodel approached him about a year before and said, hey, I got this book coming out. Would you be interested in writing about it? And Lopez said, yeah, sure, let me know. So the book comes out. Steve Hodel gives an advance copy of Black Dahlia Avenger to Steve Lopez, and Steve Lopez immediately gives it to me. What do you think? Now, Steve Hodel's publicist said, the one person in the world we do not want to see this book is Larry Harnisch. So, hey, Larry Harnisch saw it. Larry Harnisch said it was the equivalent of seeing Jesus Christ on a tortilla. It is. Do go on, Steve.
The DA, or he went to LAPD and said, hey, there's this Hodel. He says, Daddy killed a Black Dahlia, blah, blah, blah. LAPD says, go away. We don't talk about open cases.
Let me point out again, Steve Hodel wrote Black Dahlia Avenger in total secrecy. He didn't tell his family what he was working on. He didn't talk to anybody at the LAPD. Okay. Brian Carr of Robbery Homicide Division, who was the custodian of the Black Dahlia case at that time, said, you know what? If Steve Hodel had come to me and asked to see his dad's file, I would have showed it to him out of professional courtesy while he was researching the book, while he was writing the book. Of course, once the book was published, once Steve made all these allegations that there was widespread corruption in the LAPD, there's no way they were ever going to let him see it. And in fact, Steve Hodel is a pariah within the LAPD.
Right? This is a case they haven't looked at in 55, 60 years.
Oh, no, wait a minute. Wait. Steve, aren't you telling me that the LAPD is engaged in a cover-up, that it is aggressively keeping you from seeing the files, that it is still maintaining, still covering up for your dad, still maintaining that, and now you're going to tell me that, oh, the LAPD hasn't looked at that case in years? Which is it, Steve? Which is it?
So he goes to the head DA, Steve Cooley, and he says, hey, there's this Hodel, Black Dahlia, blah, blah, blah. And Cooley said, why ain't spending a dime of taxpayers' money on a 50-year-old case? He says, but you know, there is a file in the vault on the Black Dahlia. Would you like to see that? Okay.
Let's talk about what really happened, okay? There was a rogue investigation within the LAPD where, and it is long and complicated, but the guy who passed himself off as a police psychologist, Paul DeRiver, got this goofy notion that Leslie Dillon killed Elizabeth Short under a split personality, and this other personality did it. So DeRiver talked Leslie Dillon into coming out to Las Vegas to be his personal secretary. Leslie Dillon flies into Las Vegas. They kidnap him, DeRiver and the Metro Squad, and they divert to Banning. And they get Leslie Dillon at this dude ranch, and they start grilling him about, did you kill the Black Dahlia? And so Leslie Dillon, while he's being interrogated, sails a postcard out the window, says, help, I'm being held by Paul DeRiver, LAPD, get me a lawyer. And so it blew up in the LAPD's face. And so the grand jury investigation looked into the Black Dahlia case, primarily the Leslie Dillon stuff. That was mostly what they looked at. The bulk of the district attorney's files, which I've read them all, is about Leslie Dillon. There's a little bit of other stuff, and including that I know Steve will get to, transcripts of when they bugged his house. Okay, do go on.
Lopez says, yeah, I'll go downstairs, open the vault, it's upstairs to a room, opens it up, out falls a picture of Dr. George Hodel. Whoa, he was a suspect. And he did a quick and dirty article. He finds some transcripts, and you know that he was focused on as actually the prime suspect.
No. George Hodel was never, ever the prime suspect. Was he a suspect? Yes. He was never a prime suspect. The prime suspects would have been Red Manley, who left Elizabeth Short at the Biltmore Hotel, and Leslie Dillon. And if you want to get technical, maybe the sergeant, Joseph Dumais, who was in Fort Dix and confessed to it as it was a false confession. Those three guys maybe were prime suspects. George Hodel was under surveillance for 5.5 weeks and eliminated. He was never, ever a prime suspect, except in the world of Steve Hodel. Let's go on.
So I go to Cooley and I say, can I see the file? And Cooley says, yeah, I guess I have to let you in. I copy everything. And what do we find out? We find out that not only
Okay, now you didn't copy exactly everything in the file, because there's certain things nobody was allowed to copy, like the pictures of the body. I wasn't allowed to copy them either. Nobody was. So it wasn't everything.
was he the prime suspect?
No.
Get-go.
No, never the prime suspect. Never, never, never.
On the Black Dahlia. But they secretly tape recorded.
No, they didn't have tape. They used wire. Come on, Steve.
They picked him up, took him in to talk to him. And while he's in the Hall of Justice, they go out and they wire the house for sound, not telephone taps, but actual recordings in the living room, in the bedroom.
Oh, don't forget the microphone in the bathroom, Steve. There are a lot of interesting comments about your dad using the bathroom. That was one of the places they bugged. Don't forget that one.
We stake out 18 detectives 24/7 around the clock, and they get some complete admissions to it.
Yeah, maybe not so much.
They're listening, staked out, of all places, in the basement of a Hollywood station where I worked most of my career. Anyway,
Life is a circle, Steve.
but they're listening to the tapes 24/7 and shit.
It's not tape.
And he's talking to one of his close friends, this Baron Haring.
They don't know who that guy was. He was the German.
Yeah, he says to the Baron, supposing I did kill the Black Dahlia, they can't prove it now. My secretary's dead. Well, LAPD 2 years before investigated him for suspecting he overdosed the secretary.
No, that absolutely did not happen, Steve. You are a liar. Okay, there is not a single word about Ruth Spaulding, whom I identified, in the district attorney's files, except that she was the secretary. She did commit suicide. It was an overdose. The coroner investigated. It was a suicide. He did not kill her. He was never suspected of that. Nobody was ever suspected of that. It was a suicide. This is a total lie. Okay.
So, and then he goes on and makes it.
Oh. He does say those things. It's on the very first day that the equipment is installed. And your dad shoots off his mouth with a lot of things about, oh, well, this, oh, well, that. He plays to the microphones. Your dad, by your own admission, was a smart guy. And so he says, hey, I know where, if you're in law enforcement, you can get a really good deal on, clothing or furniture or stuff like that. He knew he was bugged. He was trying to get a rise out of him. It is really that simple.
And then he shortly after that flees the country.
Not shortly after that, 1951.
Anyway, a lot of different admissions, like 146-page transcript.
Yeah, it's really dull. It's really boring. I've read it. I posted it online. Your dad does a lot of typing. Your dad plays a lot of music, and they couldn't hear what he was saying. In a telephone conversation, he says the place is bugged. He knew all along.
Tape recordings, which I
Wire.
put in my book. So basically, we have a cop out to.
Only in your mind, Steve. Only in your mind is that an admission.
Cop out to the Black Dahlia murder and the secretary.
No, he didn't kill the secretary. She committed suicide.
He actually caught that on tape.
Wire.
So very solid case.
No.
90% say, okay, I'm convinced. And that led me to, as I'm investigating some of the other ones, there's actually a lot of interesting parts to his MO, as you say, and one of them was murder as a fine art.
Oh no. Here we go. Existentialism, weird stuff. Boogie, boogie, boogie.
And the posing of Elizabeth Short's body, I'm not going to go into all the gruesome details, but it was one of the reasons why it became one of the most famous whodunits on LAPD. It was
Wait a minute. It was a famous whodunit of the LAPD, but they hadn't looked at it for 50 years. Which is it, Steve? Make up your mind.
They estimated a 4-hour torture. She was
They don't know that.
surgically bisected.
That part is actually true.
Blood was drained from her body.
Yep, also true.
She was washed clean. The two separate parts were transferred to this vacant lot from a home. Actually, the crime scene turns out to be on Franklin. So
There's no proof of that whatsoever, other than you wanting it to be true.
wooden house, transported to this vacant lot, posed in a very unique fashion. The arms above the head in like a surrender position.
I wouldn't say it was a surrender position, but her arms were above her head, yes.
And then the lower half was juxtaposed just inches away. And this was to mimic a good friend of his. Our family photographer was a man by the name of Man Ray.
Oh, this is so goofy. Let me just point out that the guy who wrote Exquisite Corpse will, like everybody else who gets involved with Steve Hodel, absolutely refuses to discuss the Black Dahlia, absolutely refuses to discuss Steve Hodel, and says that book ruined my career. But do go on, Steve.
I don't know how many of you listeners know this, but Man Ray was a famous surrealist photographer.
Oh, the surrealist. Woo!
And basically, Dad, in part of his pathology was that he truly believed that there was no difference between the waking state and the dream state. So
Based on what? On what basis do you make that statement? Where?
one of his part of his sickness was that the surrealists believe this, and they talk the talk and had their wine, but Dad actually walked the walk. He believed there was no difference between the dream and the waking state. And
Sure he
he could
did.
do anything. He was a nihilist. He was a sadist in the extreme.
So, Steve, you and your dad were close, is that right?
He was a misogynist, extreme.
And you were close with this guy.
So all of these things came together in this boy genius, in his twisted mind, and became, basically I'm at over 50 years of killing. I'm at 50 victims.
Your dad never killed anybody, ever. It's all in your imagination.
From 1921 to 1969. So that's basically a quick and dirty overview.
Quick and dirty is right.
One of the very controversial parts of my investigation was,
Other than it being absolute nonsense, okay.
I go from Black Dahlia and the LA lone woman murders that leads me to a Chicago murder.
Oh, brother, here we go. Suzanne Degnan, based on, there's a Degnan Street near Norton where Elizabeth Short's body was found. You know what's terrible about this? Steve Hodel didn't originate this. He stole it. If there's anything worse than stealing an idea, it's stealing a terrible idea. There was a guy who dreamed up this thing about how Elizabeth Short's body was left on Norton Avenue as a pointer to Degnan and the killing of Suzanne Degnan. The very terrible killing in Chicago the year before. Here we go.
So there were 3 victims there. And basically, a 17-year-old boy was arrested, imprisoned by the name of William Hirons. And he spent 64 years in jail for a crime he didn't commit.
Oh, he definitely did it, Steve. Come on.
A crime my father did commit.
No, no. Are you saying your dad zipped back to Chicago just to kill Suzanne Degnan and returned to LA and nobody knew about it? Really? Is that really what you're going to say?
And I present a very strong, compelling case.
No, it's not compelling.
So he was innocent. I actually went back and talked to Degnan while he was still alive. He got
You talked to Hirons, not Degnan. Degnan's the victim.
died in prison just some years ago. But 64 years in jail for a crime he didn't commit.
He did it.
And basically, I put that together. I follow the evidence, and that leads me to a crime in Manila that the dad committed while he was living there. And it's a Black Dahlia, copycat Black Dahlia. Copycat, he did it himself. So basically, a nude woman, bisected, posed on a vacant lot about 2 miles from his house. And that,
Why would he leave a victim so close to his house, Steve? That doesn't make sense, but okay.
from there, that took me to Dad. Let's see if I have my street signs here. But basically, Dad was taunting the police. He was sending in many taunts and notes, kind of like ransom notes concealed. And basically, let's see. So
Stop and get your story straight, Steve. I don't know how you can remember it all.
in the 1943 Chicago murders,
It was 1946. You're a cop. You're supposed to know this stuff, man. Come on.
the little girl's name was Suzanne Degnan.
Yep.
Degnan, a name I've never even heard before. So what he does is he poses, again, part of his secret taunts, he poses Elizabeth Short's body off a street named Degnan,
What?
okay, referring back to
No. She wasn't found on.
a crime.
She wasn't found on. She wasn't found on Degnan, Steve. She was found on Norton. Please tell me you didn't get that wrong. Okay, let's rewind here.
To Dad, let's see if I have my street signs here. But basically, Dad was taunting the police. He was sending in many taunts and notes, kind of like ransom notes concealed. And basically, let's see. So in the 1943 Chicago murders,
46.
the little girl's name was Suzanne Degnan.
Yes.
Degnan, a name I've never even heard before. So what he does is he poses, again, part of his secret taunts, he poses Elizabeth Short's body off a street named Degnan.
Okay. Now, to be fair, and I am trying to be fair, I listened to that recording a couple more times just to make sure I had it right. When I first listened to it, I thought Steve Hodel said Elizabeth Short's body was found on Degnan. What he says is Elizabeth Short's body was found off Degnan, which is really not very accurate. I mean, it's her body was found 3 blocks away. So you could just as easily say her body was found off Crenshaw as it would be off Degnan. It's simply a stretch to prove this crazy point that there's some sort of bizarre symmetry between Elizabeth Short being found near Degnan and then the murder of Suzanne Degnan. But it's really, really a stretch. And again, he stole the idea from this crackpot. And I can't really, I won't even get into this guy's goofy ideas. But to steal this stupid idea it's pretty low.
Okay, referring back to the crime a year before. And then he poses another victim of Jean French murder.
She wasn't posed.
off a street called Mountain View. Well, Elizabeth Short's body was buried at Mountain View Cemetery.
Jean French is found on Grandview. Okay. Elizabeth Short is buried in Mountain View. There is no correlation. There is no relation. The names aren't the same. You can't link them in any way. You can't even find a sort of intriguing coincidence. It's just, there's nothing. There is nothing there.
This was just 2 weeks later he commits his crime.
Okay, it was a month later. It was February 10th, but do go on.
So you've got Dagnan, you've got Mountain View, and then we go to the Manila murder. He poses the body off a street named Zodiac. And I say to myself, no way, you know.
Yeah, good instinct. No way.
There's no way. Zodiac. I didn't know much about Zodiac. We were busy with Manson back at the same time.
Should I mention how much the LAPD screwed up the Manson case and it was the sheriff's department who really nailed it? Would that be wrong? No, I think I'll say that. The LAPD really screwed up the Manson case and it was the sheriff's department who solved it. Thank you.
Basically, I said, and I didn't know much about it, but I looked it up and said, no, this is a guy 25 years old. There's no way. But come to find out, I said, well, I'll look at it. So I get into the weeds of the Zodiac murder and come to find out there are two, you know, again, it's the hard part is breaking through the myth and the public perception of what they believe. There were two more composites
You seem to be an expert on that, on myth, Steve.
made of Zodiac and that most people have never seen. And one of them, and it's a much older man. Let's see this.
Now, Steve, let's have a little talk about that picture. I'm pretty sure that's not a police composite. I'm pretty sure that's a book jacket illustration that you got there. And here we are with the reality check. Yes, absolutely right. That illustration was not at all a police composite. It was an illustration off a book cover. And there we have it, Great Crimes of San Francisco. You know what's interesting about that? Steve Hodel knows that that is an illustration of a book jacket. He writes about it in the paperback edition of Most Evil. But yet again, here he is years later saying, oh yeah, that's a police composite. No, it's not a police composite. It was never a police composite. It is an artist illustration, and it is one more lie by Steve Hodel, one of so many.
Yeah.
See this?
Uh-huh.
So the sketch on the right is an official police sketch
It's from a book jacket, Steve. Come on.
of an much older man, of course, a man in his 40s, in his 45 to 50. Well, Dad at the time was 60, but he could easily pass for 45 or 50.
If you want him to.
Very easily, and of course, it's almost picture perfect. So I don't know. There's no way. I come out with a book called Most Evil, and I don't
Most awful is more like it.
say Dad did the Zodiac. I say, here's a lot of things. Let's do his DNA. There are a lot of things here. Well, fast forward another 6 months, and I get a contact from Paris, France, a high school teacher. And it's a symbol that Zodiac sent in. Again, he was taunting, just like Zodiac, just like Dahlia. He was taunting.
Okay, Steve, I think we have failed to lay the groundwork that all the mail that was sent in the Dahlia case was from the killer and not pranksters. It probably would be a good idea if you were laying out a case like, you know, in court, to establish that all of those letters and postcards came from the actual killer and not just people playing a joke on the cops and the newspapers. Okay, you really, were you a cop? Really? Really?
I think he wrote a total of 21 letters. Anyway, on one of these, there was a mysterious symbol. and nobody has to this day has figured it out. I got contact from this French high school teacher who says, hey, this symbol is an ancient Celtic language, and it's got 5 letters, and the 5 letters are H-O-D-E-L.
I just got chills.
And
Yeah, me too, but not in the good way.
there's much more to it. We don't have time to go through all the evidence and linkage, but that definitely got my attention. And we're actually I'm working now with a production company, and we're actually going to have a mini-series come out.
Yeah, talk to me when it's ready to launch. I won't hold my breath.
Hopefully end of this year, I'm not sure when. We've got about 40 hours of interviews with me in the can already, and now we're going to resume and finish it up. So it's real exciting. We've got T-Bone Burnett's going to do the music, and Nick Pizzolatto, who did True Detective 1, 2, and 3. He was the writer and creator of that. He's on board, and
You've never heard of these people. They haven't done anything in years. Their IMDb credits are like zilch, but do go on.
so I'm real excited that, basically that's going to happen, and we can break through the myth and really get, and also the murders of fine art is a huge part of the story. I mean, it just goes on, and we really
It does go on and on.
get into the mind of the pathology of George Hodel, and see how it all comes together in his twisted version. So I'm very excited about it, and I've just come out recently in November, I published the early years,
You're repeating yourself, Steve. We know that.
which covers his crimes in the 20s and 30s.
Nobody's buying those books, Steve. They're bombing.
Didn't wake up at age 40 and say, I think I'll be a serial killer.
You said all of this already.
So, and I leave it to the reader to decide which of these are good or not, whether he did or not. I'm not making a call. I'm just presenting the evidence.
He didn't do any of them.
Leaving you to be the judge and jury. Well, that's kind of where we're at for now. I'm sorry that was a long narrative, Don, but it's a lot to tell.
That's the end of part 1. That's Steve's general presentation. Part 2 is going to be the Q&A. Thanks for everybody who made it to the end of the video. I hope it was entertaining. I do apologize for the primitive nature of this technology, but this is the best I can do under these conditions. And thank you to Sisters in Crime. I really appreciate it. Okay, on to part 2.